What'd I miss?
Basically, Bertrand's been telling everyone that, you're the devil.
Oh, nice.
What was the first Infamous game you ever played? Chances are your answer also dictates which game you think is the best, because over just 5 years and 3 games, the Infamous series changed drastically. Like a superhero honing their power set, each new Infamous installment morphed into something new. Something that was supposed to be the ultimate version of itself. But no amount of power was enough to keep the series from fading away. Sucker Punch Productions was taking a pretty big chance when the original Infamous hit the PS3 in 2009. Having created the highly stylized stealth platformer Sly Cooper for Sony in 2002, the dev team was very comfortable with the early PlayStation era of cartoon mascots and level-based collectathons. Infamous, however, was nothing like their previous hit. Heavily inspired by Batman No Man's Land, as well as Brian Wood and Ricardo Berchielli's DMZ, Infamous was set in a gritty and realistic-looking open world with a comic book type aesthetic and fairly mature themes. The premise was simple, yet immediately interesting to players. What would happen if a regular person, like Bike Messenger and protagonist Cole McGrath, suddenly got superpowers?
I saw something I shouldn't have, and now the Reapers are gunning for me. Now, you gotta help me. You gotta help me!
Ah, crap.
With the karma system, the answer to that question was up to the players. And while many of the choices you could make ended up being pretty lackluster, the system would go on to become a massive part of Infamous' legacy. Because it wasn't just implemented into the story beats, it was interwoven throughout all the game's major elements. The gameplay was really the shocking standout of Infamous. Sucker Punch managed to make superpowers feel fun and fresh, allowing players the freedom to really grow in a natural way by performing karmically good or bad deeds. They could customize their play experience through the use of experience points, and depending on a player's choices, they could perform different abilities. This affected everything from combat to the way the people of Empire City would react to Cole's presence. But while combat and karmic recognition were great, traversing the grimy city was just as fun. As you can see by the way Cole runs and climbs over obstacles, like a certain other Sony protagonist, Sucker Punch was definitely leaning into a movement system that would become a staple for action-adventure games. But they put their own spin on it with the ability to freely parkour and grind on things like power cables and train rails. All combined, Infamous was an incredibly fun game to play. Sucker Punch really let players live out their dream of slowly becoming a superpowered being capable of doing great and terrible deeds.
What's wrong with you? People are starving and you're stealing the only food they've seen in days?
I did it for us, to make sure we're taken care of.
I don't get you sometimes.
But that wasn't the idea they initially started with. Surprisingly, even before it came out, Infamous underwent some significant changes. After the success of the first 3 Sly Cooper games, Sucker Punch actually pitched several new ideas to Sony. The one they decided to go with was tentatively titled True Hero. Even in this early stage, the game was very focused on morality, decision-making, and superheroes. Largely because, in game director Nate Fox's words,
wanted to make a superhero game. A lot of that came from us being comic book nerds.
That's pretty much where the similarities between the first concept and the finished product stop, though. True Hero was originally conceived as a game more akin to Animal Crossing, where players roamed your city, tracked down criminals, helped out the citizens, and did some light zoning work along the way, under the guise of your mild-mannered alter ego as a property developer. Throughout development, and thanks in large part to comic book writer Bill Harms, who was brought onto the project, the story got a lot darker and more complex, as did the decisions players were expected to make. Thus, the whole game changed around the karma system to make Infamous as we know it today.
I could zap that guy and cut him loose. Or maybe I just walk away and leave him there to rot.
It's strange to think that Infamous started out as something so categorically different, but really, we can look back on its development as foreshadowing for the fate of the series. Because despite all the developmental changes, Infamous released as a solid, highly polished gem in 2009. And after selling over 1 million copies in less than a year, it was clear that a sequel would be coming soon. 2011's Infamous 2 was definitely different from its predecessor in that it leaned much harder on the aspects of the game people liked and fully abandoned the ones that were received poorly. Practically every aspect of the first game was revisited and reworked for the sequel. The visuals of the game pivoted quite a bit. The comic-like illustrations increased in both quality and quantity. Our protagonist was no longer sporting a heavy jacket, though his buzz cut remained after an E3 trailer showing Cole with longer hair caused a baffling amount of player backlash. Cole also moved and sounded different than fans of the original might have remembered.
Homie, you got a little something in common.
Since Sucker Punch opted to replace voice actor Jason Cottle with Eric Layden when they started recording mocap and VO at the same time. The environments were rendered beautifully, with a pretty big graphical jump happening industry-wide around 2010. And that also aided in Sucker Punch's new focus on cinematic combat. More superpower customization was put into Infamous 2, as well as a brand new melee weapon, giving players the option to get up close with their foes in a way that just wasn't as fun in the first game. And Sucker Punch made sure that each close quarters encounter looked and felt epic. But no Infamous game would be complete without the karma system. In Infamous 2, more meaningful player choice was implemented into the story. But in an attempt to give players higher stakes, they subsequently cut players off from playing particular missions. This was frustrating to some, who didn't want any of the action walled off. It was clear from the change in Cole's hair to the controversially significant player choices that Sucker Punch was trying to take their players' criticisms to heart. This propelled Infamous 2 into the third best-selling game on Sony's roster the month it came out, which meant that the developers were once again going to dip into the Infamous well for a third installment. But their player-pleasing tendencies would lead to the most controversial change in series history. The end of Infamous 2 sees Cole McGrath take on the powers of the game's antagonist and become an all-power supervillain. But because it's a game about player choice, there was another ending, one where Cole sacrifices himself for the good of the world. And though the developers consider the former to be canon, over 70% of players chose the good ending of the game, meaning that for most returning players, Cole McGrath was dead. That's a pretty big thing to consider when writing a game sequel. And when you add to it the sudden influx of brand new players who were getting into gaming for the first time with the hugely popular PS4, Sucker Punch had a tough decision to make. Should they continue Cole's story, or should they begin anew?
Oh, I can get you right between the eyes.
No, just don't be a dick.
2014's infamous Second Son would take the latter course of action, bringing a brand new protagonist to the third installment in the series. But a new character meant more than just a change of face. Voiced and performed by the legendary Troy Baker, Delsin Rowe was full of personality, unlike the late Cole McGrath, whose sidekick did most of the joking around.
What? It's kind of funny because aren't you a bioterrorist too?
Delsin's anti-authoritarian backstory made him a much more well-rounded character with quirks that Cole simply didn't possess. This gave the entire game a much lighter tone, and for some, it felt much less mature than the previous iterations. But conversely, the plot of the game attempted to be much more sophisticated than its predecessors. The highly political story about post-9/11 government security and the mistreatment of Native Americans in the real-world city of Seattle made the karma system a little trickier than in the first two installments. Given the seeming complexity of the issues at hand, the choices given to players often felt clumsy and underdeveloped. On top of this, with Delsin's much more defined personality, it made some players feel forced to choose the side of good. There was also a new power set to consider. Cole's explosive moves didn't really fit Delsin, so combat had to be rethought. This also meant that the game's controls and movement system were totally reworked, with Delsin's powers playing a huge part in how players traverse the map. And since Delsin's powers were brand new to him, players were once again on the journey of learning and honing their craft instead of picking up where they left off with a pre-established super being. For many, this was actually a highlight, because Delsin's power set was not only far more in-depth than Cole's had ever been, but every move looked beautiful. The game is gorgeous and still stands up to scrutiny today. The comic book aesthetic from the first two games was largely abandoned, leaving room for Delsin's graffiti art motif. But it worked. The particle and lighting effects of Delsin's powers were unmatched at the time, and the rainy Seattle weather was rendered in ways modern gaming audiences had never seen before. Sucker Punch really played this up, filling the world with neon lights, natural sunlight, and the bright colors associated with Delsin's various powers. On the whole, Second Son has the lowest reviews of all the games except the supplemental prequel Infamous First Light. But despite the criticisms of the story, main character, and misuse of the series' karma system, the visuals and fun factor were enough for most. The game outsold all of its predecessors and became one of the best-selling PS4 titles, moving over 1 million copies in just 9 days. By now, you should recognize the pattern of Infamous selling well and getting another installment greenlit. But as of recording, that hasn't happened. While rumors of another game have been floating around for years, Sucker Punch has no official plans to return to the series. After all their experimentation, drastic changing, and player pleasing, they still dropped Infamous. But the question is, why? Infamous is still fun. No matter which iteration players jumped into for their first time, there was plenty of enjoyment to be had with the series' super-powered antics. The most realistic answer is that the developers have moved on to bigger and arguably better things. And it's preferable to go out willingly with respect before you're forced out by failure. To go from Sly Cooper to Infamous to Ghost of Tsushima is no small feat. And Sucker Punch doesn't make a habit of revisiting a series after they're done with them. But who's to say they can't break that habit? There's still time for Sucker Punch to build up their karma and give Infamous the good ending it deserves. Thanks so much for watching today's video. Be sure to let us know in the comments whether you'd like to see another Infamous game. And while you're at it, like the video and subscribe to Nerdstalgic Gaming if you want more content like this.